While Trump was busy crushing Canada with 35% tariffs, Europeans made a shocking decision that has him absolutely livid. Where they're going instead will make your jaw drop. Let's begin. August 2025 was supposed to mark Trump's triumphant return to economic dominance. His tariff threats had brought dozens of countries to the negotiating table, and Canada was feeling the squeeze with devastating 35% import duties. But while Trump was celebrating his tough stance on America's northern neighbor, something unprecedented was happening across the Atlantic that would expose the fatal flaw in his entire strategy. Europeans were voting with their wallets, and they were voting against America. Aviation data from Cirium revealed a stunning shift that caught the Trump administration completely off guard. A record-breaking 4,276 flights were scheduled between Canada and Europe for August alone, representing a 40% surge over the past decade and a 5% jump from the previous year. But the real shock came from what Europeans weren't doing. They weren't flying to America anymore. Hotel giant Accor's CEO delivered the devastating news in April. Forward bookings from Europeans to the US had collapsed by a staggering 25%. Instead of New York and Los Angeles, Europeans were choosing Toronto and Vancouver. Instead of Disney World, they were picking the Canadian Rockies. Trump's America First policies, designed to make the United States more attractive to international partners, had achieved exactly the opposite result. His aggressive tariffs, unpredictable trade wars, and hostile rhetoric had turned America's closest allies into active competitors for the same European tourists and business travelers that had once flocked to U.S. destinations. The warning signs had been flashing red for months, but Trump's administration was too focused on their tariff victories to notice the strategic disaster unfolding. As early as March, travel data firm OAG reported that airlines had cut capacity by 3.5% on routes between the US and Canada for July and August. The official explanation was uncertainty surrounding the broader trade dispute, but the reality was far more damaging. Europeans weren't just avoiding America because of political tensions, they were actively choosing Canada as a superior alternative. Air Canada seized the opportunity aggressively, adding an extra 112 flights and 34,500 seats in August alone. The airline opened 5 new transatlantic routes, including connections from Edinburgh, Scotland, and Naples, Italy, directly to Montreal. The contrast with American Airlines was stark and humiliating. While Air Canada was expanding European routes by double digits, U.S. carriers were seeing only marginal 4% growth in transatlantic traffic, and even that was primarily driven by price cuts and desperate promotional campaigns rather than genuine demand. The currency dynamics made Canada's advantage even more pronounced. The U.S. dollar had weakened by 11% against the euro since the start of the year, making American vacations expensive for Europeans. Meanwhile, the Canadian dollar had declined by only 6% against the euro, positioning Canada as a more affordable North American destination. But the real damage went far beyond currency fluctuations. Trump's erratic behavior, trade wars, and constant threats had fundamentally altered how Europeans perceived America as a travel destination. What had once been seen as the land of opportunity and excitement was increasingly viewed as unpredictable and hostile to foreign visitors. Canada, by contrast, was benefiting from a massive perception shift. Prime Minister Mark Carney's measured responses to Trump's provocations, Canada's stable political environment, and its reputation for welcoming international visitors made it an obvious alternative for Europeans seeking a North American experience without American complications. Subscribe to our channel if you're enjoying the video. The moment that crystallized Canada's triumph came on July 31st, when Trump signed his executive order increasing Canadian tariffs to 35%. Within hours, the devastating irony of his strategy became clear through a flood of European travel data that painted a picture of American isolation and Canadian success. The numbers were brutal for American tourism. European visitors, who had historically represented one of the most lucrative segments of U.S. tourism, were systematically choosing Canada instead. Montreal was seeing record hotel bookings from European travelers. Vancouver's tourism industry was booming with visitors from London, Paris, and Frankfurt, who would have previously chosen Seattle or San Francisco. The aviation data told the complete story of Trump's strategic failure. While flights between Europe and Canada were hitting all-time highs, European airlines were quietly reducing their American routes. Thomas Cook and eSky Group's Holidays digital director confirmed what the data suggested. Despite some price-driven rebounds in May, the fundamental shift away from American destinations was accelerating. Most damaging for Trump was the demographic profile of the Europeans choosing Canada over America. These weren't budget tourists looking for cheap vacations, they were exactly the high-spending, culturally curious travelers that American destinations desperately needed. Business travelers, luxury tourists, and young professionals were all gravitating toward Canadian cities that offered the North American experience without the political baggage. The business community impact was equally devastating. European executives who had previously combined business trips to New York or Chicago with leisure time were now routing their North American travels through Toronto and Montreal instead. Canadian cities were becoming the preferred entry points for Europeans doing business across the continent. Air Canada's expansion strategy perfectly captured Canada's opportunity. The new Edinburgh-Montreal route directly competed with traditional Edinburgh-Boston connections. The Naples-Montreal service offered Italians an alternative to Miami or New York. Each new Canadian route represented European tourists and business travelers who were no longer contributing to the American economy. The hotel industry data provided the most concrete evidence of America's loss. Accor's revelation that European bookings to the U.S. had dropped by 25% represented billions in lost tourism revenue. These weren't temporary cancellations. They were fundamental shifts in travel patterns that could persist for years. Trump's reaction to the tourism exodus was characteristically furious and misdirected. Instead of acknowledging that his own policies had driven Europeans away, he lashed out at Canada for stealing American tourists and threatened even higher tariffs in retaliation. His social media posts became increasingly erratic, at one point suggesting that Canada's decision to recognize Palestinian statehood was somehow connected to European travel patterns. The immediate economic impact on American tourism was staggering. Cities like Boston, which had traditionally competed with Montreal for European visitors, saw dramatic drops in international bookings. Miami's hospitality industry, already struggling with various Trump-era complications, faced the prospect of losing its traditional European clientele to Toronto and Vancouver. American Airlines scrambled to respond, but their options were limited. They couldn't match Air Canada's aggressive expansion because demand for U.S. routes was declining, not growing. Price cuts helped somewhat, but they came at the cost of profitability and couldn't address the fundamental perception problems that Trump's policies had created. The financial markets reacted with concern about the long-term implications for American service industries. Tourism and hospitality stocks fell as investors recognized that Trump's trade wars were damaging industries far beyond traditional manufacturing and agriculture. Canadian tourism companies, meanwhile, saw their valuations surge as investors bet on continued European demand. The political fallout extended beyond economic concerns. Republican lawmakers from states dependent on tourism began questioning whether Trump's aggressive international stance was worth the cost in lost visitors and revenue. Florida Republicans, in particular, expressed alarm about Miami's declining European bookings and the potential impact on the state's crucial hospitality sector. Most painfully for Trump, the European tourism shift highlighted the broader failure of his America First messaging. Instead of making America more attractive to international partners, his policies had made America less competitive in global markets for tourism, business travel, and cultural exchange. The European tourism shift to Canada represents more than just a temporary response to Trump's policies. It marks a fundamental realignment of North American travel patterns that could persist long after current political tensions subside. Canada's strategic advantage goes far beyond simple political considerations. The infrastructure investments being made to accommodate European visitors, new flight routes, expanded hotel capacity, enhanced tourism marketing create lasting competitive advantages that will be difficult for the United States to overcome even with future policy changes. The demographic implications are particularly concerning for American long-term interests. European visitors to North America often become investors, business partners, and cultural ambassadors for their chosen destinations. By choosing Canada over the United States, Europeans are building relationships and familiarity with Canadian markets, cities, and opportunities that could influence decades of future economic interactions. The airline industry transformation reflects these deeper structural changes. Air Canada's aggressive European expansion creates route networks and operational capabilities that position the airline to capture an even larger share of transatlantic travel in the future. American carriers, meanwhile, face the prospect of reduced European demand, constraining their ability to maintain competitive international route structures. Perhaps most significantly, the tourism shift demonstrates how Trump's economic nationalism has undermined American soft power in unexpected ways. Tourism and cultural exchange have historically been crucial tools for maintaining American influence and attractiveness on the global stage. By making America a less welcoming destination for international visitors, Trump has inadvertently strengthened Canada's position as the preferred North American destination for global engagement. The business travel implications extend far beyond tourism statistics. European executives who become familiar with Canadian markets through travel are more likely to consider Canadian cities for expansion, investment, and partnership opportunities. Toronto and Montreal are positioning themselves as European-friendly alternatives to traditional American business centers like New York and Chicago. The currency advantages that initially drove some European preference for Canada are now being reinforced by infrastructure and relationship investments that create lasting competitive advantages. Even if currency relationships change, the route networks, hotel partnerships, and marketing relationships established during this period will continue to benefit Canadian tourism at American expense. Educational and cultural exchange patterns are also shifting in Canada's favor. European students and researchers who might have previously chosen American universities and institutions are increasingly looking to Canadian alternatives. These academic relationships often translate into decades of future business and cultural connections that favor Canadian over American interests. The ultimate irony of Trump's approach is that his attempt to prioritize American economic interests has systematically damaged American competitiveness in one of the country's most important service industries. Tourism and hospitality represent millions of American jobs and hundreds of billions in economic activity. Yet, Trump's policies have driven international customers toward Canadian competitors. The European travel shift also highlights the interconnected nature of Trump's various policy failures. His tariffs on Canada were designed to force economic concessions, but they've instead encouraged European allies to support Canadian alternatives to American services. His immigration restrictions were meant to enhance security, but they've made America seem less welcoming to international visitors who now choose Canada instead. Looking ahead, the Canada-Europe tourism corridor that's developing during Trump's presidency could become one of his most lasting negative legacies. Even if future American administrations adopt more welcoming policies toward international visitors, the infrastructure, relationships, and travel patterns established during this period will be extremely difficult to reverse. The broader lesson for American economic strategy is sobering. In a globally connected economy, attempts to use aggressive tactics against allies often backfire in unexpected ways. Trump's war on Canada hasn't just damaged bilateral trade relationships, it's driven European allies to strengthen their ties with Canadian alternatives to American services and destinations. As 2026 approaches, the tourism data tells a clear story of strategic failure. Canada is welcoming record numbers of European visitors, building lasting relationships, and establishing itself as the preferred North American destination for international travelers. Meanwhile, America is losing billions in tourism revenue and watching its global attractiveness decline, all as a direct result of policies that were supposed to make America more competitive, not less. If you want more global politics, subscribe to our channel.